Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast with me, Rory Lees-Oakes. And on a beautiful sunny day in Mosley, I have my partner in therapy in an equally sunny place, hopefully, Mr. Ken Kelly. How are you doing, Ken?
I'm doing exceptionally well. Thank you very much for asking, Rory. And I'm looking out of my window, and yes, I too see the blueness of the sky. Very rare indeed. But what's really nice is I'm looking at the swifts flying and darting through the air. So it's very picturesque and beautiful today.
Sounds great. Sounds idyllic. The summer always brings great hope, I think. It's a lovely day out of the studio window here, Ken.
It is, and it's interesting as well to see if you see that within your counselling placement. I certainly notice that there's kind of ebbs and flows according to the seasons and how people present, and it's just interesting. I think that's a good master's study out there somewhere. So if anyone's listening to this and has either access to such research, please share it, because I'd love to have a look at that. But we've got a great episode for you today. So this is episode 16 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. We're going to be kicking off speaking about self-care, and we'll get to that in a moment. We've got a very good reason why we're going to cover that, and we'll give you the reason for that in a moment. I know, Rory, you are really bringing us something good and interesting, the meat and potatoes today of Gestalt therapy, a great overview, so you definitely want to be tuning in for that one. Within skills, it's going to be the last skills session of this season. Oh. And we're going to be looking at honing skills. It's going to be kind of an overview of, we've covered so many different topics in the skills with Ken section. We're going to be looking at, okay, so how can we hone our skills? How can we practice our skills? How can we improve our skills now that we have all of that knowledge? And then to end off, we've got a great topic that we're going to be covering, and that is how we change when we're doing our counselling training, how we change as people and how that affects the relationships and our relationship with the people around us, and I guess the way that they see us as well. So lots to get in today. But we start off with self-care. And why do we speak about self-care at this time, Rory?
Well, I think if you're a student or even if you're a qualified practitioner, you might be thinking of taking a little bit of downtime, holidays, and it's really important that in a profession such as ours, where you're giving so much of self, that you exercise self-care. And in fact, it's an ethical imperative. If you look at the BACP ethical framework, it tells you that self-care is actually a ethical consideration. And we do it because we need to look after ourselves. We need to offer ourselves the same kind of care we offer to our clients. And I'm reminded, Ken, of a famous quote by Rogers, who famously said, I'm paraphrasing here. I'm not really good at offering self-care to myself, but recently I've become better at it. And I think he was 82 when he when he told us this. Yeah. So it was a bit of a late convert to self-care. But what kind of self-care do you get up to, Ken?
One of the bits of self-care that I'm going to be covering is the fact that we're going to be taking a break from the podcast. So this episode is going to be the last in what we're going to call season 1, and we're certainly going to be picking up in season 2 when we come back from the UK summer break and we go into the new UK academic year. So that's going to be kind of our downtime, and the reason for that is, as therapists, we bring a lot into the sessions, I guess. We're fully 100% present. We need to be for psychological contact to be possible. Counselling, psychotherapy, being there with somebody as they're bringing their pain, their suffering, the darkness of their life, is not something you can phone in. You've got to be 100% there and 100% present. And I guess when we start noticing that we're less able to do that, it's a time to consider how we might look to care for self. So for myself, to answer your question, Rory, what do I do? I kind of crash and just get away from it all. I close down everything. I close down my email, social media. I don't engage with the outside world. I allow my answering machine to answer my phone for me. And I really do cut off and completely disengage, because I can find myself saying, oh, I'm going to take a bit of a break. But if I'm not going away, it's very easy for me to say, oh, let me just check my emails. Before I know it, 3 hours have gone and I found myself engaging and working again.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And I have a saying that I'm going off the grid. And I do exactly the same. I just switch all my emails off. I deliberately leave my phone at home if I go out, and just give myself a time away from everything. And I usually go and visit a few tea rooms, to be honest. I do a tour of tea rooms.
I'm surprised that you should link tea with self-care, Rory.
It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah, maybe I should see a therapist, Ken.
So I get that, and I know you do that, and I know that you enjoy walking, and I know you enjoy getting back to nature. I guess similarly here, I try and go away from time to time, even if it's small breaks. But I guess if we're debating this topic, what are the signs? So you've got that maybe not being able to fully engage. There's a sign. But what are the consequences maybe of not taking that self-care? And yes, consequences to us, but we, as counsellors, as therapists, I guess we look to our clients as well. We're there for them. How can it impact on them? And burnout is very real and is absolutely devastating for self and for your practice, because burnout basically takes you to a place where you almost feel that you can't cope anymore.
Absolutely, Ken. And the other thing with burnout, it can be very hard to come back from it. Once you're burnt out, it can take a lot of self-reconstruction to get you back in a place where you can re-engage. So it's a lot easier to try and address it before you come to that stage. It's a bit like your teeth. You know, if you look after them, they're gonna look after you, and it's the same with yourself. If you look after your own emotional health, it'll look after you. But if you leave it too long and you get unwell or you get burnt out, then it can take an awful lot of recovery to come back to a place where you're just okay with yourself.
100%. Part of my self-care is my supervision. And I understand that my supervision is there primarily for the benefit of my clients. I had supervision just a few short days ago, and boy, I feel lighter when I leave supervision, because I get to take in stuff that I can't share with other human beings because I'm carrying confidential information. I get to put that in front of my supervisor, and that lightens my burden. So I find that part of my self-care is regular supervision from my supervisor.
Absolutely, Ken. And you just cannot underestimate that. And it doesn't always have to be about clients either. Sometimes it's okay to speak about self in supervision. Your supervisor may say, maybe you need to seek your own therapy on a few things. But I would talk about self-care, and I would expect my supervisor, and as a supervisor myself, to speak about self-care in terms of the general comings and goings of having supervision. You know, how you're looking after yourself, what's your client load, you know, how you're using your downtime, because all that's part of that kind of managerial arm of supervision.
100%. And I know that a good supervisor will also be pointing out and asking you about your downtime and saying, hey, how are you taking a break, and what are you doing for yourself? We need to be there for ourselves before we can be there for our clients, and that is so important. We need to be able to monitor that, and of course supervision is a way of doing that. Maybe another way, I know many of my colleagues find that journaling is a way for them to kind of process, and it's in essence a way of self-care, because they're able to get maybe the jumble or the weight of what they're carrying inside out. They have what am I looking for? I'm looking for a word here, a mechanism, a way to kind of get that out of self, as opposed to it just going round and round. So maybe journaling. But I guess it's going to be different for all people. Maybe it's watching a good film and just shutting off. Maybe it's about taking days away from your practice and keeping them as keeping the boundaries in place. I guess self-care maybe is about boundaries, having boundaries.
Always. Self-care is always about having boundaries. And I can remember many years ago, a learner saying to me, Are you a counsellor all the time? And I said, no. I said, I've got many other facets to me. Here you see me as a counsellor and a tutor of counsellors. And she said, so if someone knocked on your door, next door neighbour, and said to you, I've got trouble, can you counsel me? What would you say? And I said, well, I'd say, well, that sounds pretty difficult for you at the moment, and maybe I could give you a referral to someone who could give you some help, a counsellor or an organisation. And she said, oh, that's terrible, Rory. She said, you're a terrible person. I remember this. Terrible person, she said. If I've got a friend who lives next door as a counsellor, and she listens to everybody. And then she paused, and without a hint of irony, Ken, she said, mind you, she's had a few nervous breakdowns. And there lies the story. If you're there for everybody all the time, you're just going to get absolutely wasted. And that's not a good place.
100%. So as we come to the end of Series 1 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast, and we take our break and we take our respite, I guess, from having to prepare each week and really be mindful of the material, because we're 100% there for you. So we're always thinking and mulling things over in our mind. Maybe it's a time for you to consider your self-care at this time as we go into what is the British summertime, where the academic year ends, and traditionally many families do take a break. And in that, of course, being mindful of how we navigate that with our clients, how we give them sufficient notice that we are going to be taking a break, because we are recognised that we can't be there 365 days a year. We do need to take that rest for that self-care, but we also need to be mindful of how we handle that with our clients.
Absolutely, Ken. And again, that's one for supervision. I would discuss that in supervision as I came to the end of the year. And my supervisor would expect me to discuss it and work out, where my clients are. Have they got the appropriate support systems in place should they come into crisis? And all that mapping of support for your client should be done well in advance of going on holiday. I think we say it's about a 1 week's notice for every month you work with the client. So if you work with the client 6 months, you should really be giving the client 6 weeks notice or more if you've got a client who you think is going to need some support while you're away. And it's okay, and I'm always saying this to people, it's okay to be away. It's okay to be away from your practice. It's okay to go on holiday and have a bucket and spade or whatever you do, because that's part of your own self-care. And
of course, if you want to delve deeper into endings, because it is, even if you are kind of just taking a break, it's a kind of ending that you're having with your client. You go to episode 10 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast, and there's a whole section where we look at endings and the different kinds of endings and the different ways that we might kind of introduce that to our clients. So that's an ending from us, I guess, of this first episode. What is it? Season. It's a season, isn't it, Rory?
Season, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and we'd be interested to hear your feedback of what you thought of season 1. Maybe some suggestions of what you'd like to see more of in season 2. And of course, you can do that by visiting our Facebook page, which is really easy to find. You just go to Facebook and put in Counselling Tutor in the top search bar, and we're right at the top. It's a closed group, so you just knock on the door and you come on inside. If you're already a member, we welcome you to kind of make your suggestions on how you found season 1 and what you'd like to see more of in season 2. But of course, it's on with today. And today, Rory, in theory, with Rory, is going to be looking at an overview of Gestalt. I'm really excited about this one, Rory.
Well, yeah, it's... I'm not a Gestalt therapist or a Gestaltist, as they refer them to themselves as, Gestaltists. But keep listening, because I found something really interesting. I found a connection between Gestalt psychotherapy and the song by Kate Bush called Cloudbusting. More of that in Theory with Rory, as well as me discussing the tenets of Gestalt.
Counselling Theory with Rory Lees-Oakes.
So, in this week's Theory with Rory, we're going to have a look at Gestalt psychotherapist and the ideas around Gestalt. So, first of all, I'd like to kind of talk about what Gestalt means. And here we are in the first little bit of a paradox about the therapy. Gestalt is a German word, and it has no direct translation. So, the best we can get is a completion, a connection, a circle maybe. But it does give us a clue to what the therapy is about, and it's about connecting with ourselves both emotionally and physically. So let's keep that in mind as we move through the world of Gestalt psychotherapy. So it was developed by Fritz and Laura Perls. Fritz Perls was born in 1893 and he died in 1970. And his wife Laura Perls was born in 1905 and she died in 1990. And here's the thing, they both developed the therapy, but Laura Perls gets very little mention. And as we'll see, as we go through this little bit of a presentation, you'll discover she had quite a big input into the world of Gestalt. So Gestalt psychotherapy isn't just about kind of talking about your experiences. It's about confronting them. And anybody who's seen Fritz Perls in the Gloria film that was made by Schulstrom, who directed it, it was called 3 Approaches to Psychotherapy, and it's on YouTube, will note that Fritz Perls was very, very confrontational to Gloria. And in fact, anybody who watches it thinks he was just a bit bullying. But actually, what he was trying to do was get Gloria to confront things that were going through her mind, and also the way she sort of presented herself to the world. So a big part of Gestalt psychotherapy is about confronting, and Fritz Perls gives us a real clue in that film. He says any movement into the past or into the future is an escape from reality. So when a client talks about going into the past, talks about what's happened in the past or what might happen in the future, a Gestalt psychotherapist may very well challenge that as a defence or an avoidance mechanism, because the past is gone and the future, of course, is yet to be lived. So it's real here and now work, which really gives a little insight into its very close relative in the world of counselling and psychotherapy. That's person-centred therapy. So it's about the here and now, but where Gestalt moves away from person-centred therapy is Gestalt is a holistic view of the human body. So it's not just how we feel, it's how we exhibit them. And it's here that I'll share a little story from my early training years. When I first did my introduction to counselling skills many, many years ago, I had a tutor who was a Gestaltist. And first of all, that's the term that Gestalt psychotherapists give to themselves. They're called Gestaltists, they're practice Gestalt. And she shared a story of a female client she was working with, who every time she talked about her partner, the client would kick her leg. And my tutor said, I've noticed that every time you talk about your partner, you kick your leg. And she said, yes, because I want to kick him out of the house. And at the time, I thought this was a bit of I'd also heard this recounted on Radio 4 about a year earlier. And I thought at the time it was a bit of an apocryphal story. In other words, a story told that wasn't true to make a point. So imagine my surprise a few years later, about 4 years later, when I was a practicing therapist as a student, and I observed a woman talking about a partner, and she was doing the same thing. So I said to her, I noticed when you talk about your partner, you kick your leg. And she too wanted to kick her partner out of the house. And if I remember, a few other places she wanted to kick him, which probably we won't go into in a family podcast. So it's about observing people's physical behaviour. So it's an interesting therapy, and we'll talk about a little bit more about how Gestalt therapists kind of observe the human condition and how they work with it. So if we talk about Fritz Perls, he was born in Berlin and he was Jewish, of Jewish heritage, and he had a sister, sadly, that was killed by the Nazis in World War II. He wasn't particularly good at school, he failed at school, and then when he decided to return to school, he decided to study medicine, and during the First World War, he served in the medical corps, and his specialism was psychiatry. And during the 1920s, he began his own psychoanalysis with a few people, but the two people that really stand out is Wilhelm Reich and Karen Horney. Now, Karen Horney wrote a book called The Tyranny of Shoulds, very famous psychotherapist in her own right. But Wilhelm Reich, and this is where the connection to the Kate Bush song Cloud Busting comes from, Wilhelm Reich was the man who made the cloud busting machine. And here's an interesting factoid. If you've ever watched cloud busting, Google it on YouTube if you've ever come across the Kate Bush song. It's a song about a boy and his father pushing this cloud busting machine up a hill, and he's trying to make it rain with this contraption, and then he's arrested by the authorities and taken away and never seen again, but it rained. And guess what? It's based on a true story. Peter Reich, who was Wilhelm Reich's son, wrote a book called A Book of Dreams. It's available now, I think. It's been republished. And hey, guess what? That is what Kate Bush based the song on. And in fact, Wilhelm Reich ended up being arrested by the authorities, locked up, and he spent the rest of his life in prison. And the charge was that he was selling cloudbuster machines that didn't work and a few other cures that weren't medically proven. And if you're interested in the conspiracy theory about Wilhelm Reich, if you just type in cloudbusting and conspiracy theory into Google, you'll be entertained for a good few days, I can assure you. So there's a little bit of historic context. Wilhelm Reich, he invented the cloud busting machine. But interestingly enough, if we go back to Fitzgerald, he was pretty much unimpressed, I think, with the work of psychoanalysis, and I kind of guess that's what spurred him on to find his own therapy. Laura Pearls was a very talented woman. She was a pianist, constant pianist, and she obtained a doctor. She obtained a doctorship in Gestalt. And she studied existential psychotherapy with Buber, who was another very famous and very well-respected psychotherapist. They married, and not long after their marriage, they had to leave Germany because of the Nazis and, of course, the persecution of the Jews. And they moved to Amsterdam, and then they moved off to South Africa, and they spent a lot of time in South Africa, and Fritz Perls, I think, met Freud in South Africa, and he kind of made peace a little bit with psychoanalysis. After meeting Freud, he was a bit more relaxed about it. But here's the interesting thing. It was during his time in South Africa that Laura, Fitzgerald's wife, observed their children eating and chewing behaviours, and that is what forms the basis of Gestalt. We've all heard people talk about swallowing one's pride, or eating humble pie, or taking a gulp, or I'll go away and chew on that, chewing the fat. There's so many metaphors, isn't there, around eating. Biting off more than one can chew is another quite famous metaphor. But basically, what it's referring to is something called mental metabolism. And that effectively is that when we think about something, we produce bodily actions to amplify what we're thinking. Remember the woman who was kicking her leg that I talked about earlier? That's a really good example. And that is what the therapy is built on. And they left South Africa because of the apartheid regime, and they moved to New York City, and they conducted workshops, and he eventually, I think, left America, and I think he ended up in Canada, where he died. He died in 1970. There's a story, I'm not sure how true it is, that he was conducting a workshop, became ill, and he died of a heart attack. But he wasn't so keen on America at the end of his time. What else can we talk about? The context is interesting. If you think of the kind of connections that Gestalt psychotherapy makes with other therapies and other events in history, that too is interesting. So it takes a lot from Freud's psychoanalysis. It takes a lot from field theory, which is Kurt Lewin, who will do a podcast on at some point, field theory, and that's effectively about force and counterforce in personality change. The workshops that they undertook. Wilhelm Reich's focus on body awareness. So one of the key things about Wilhelm Reich before he was locked up, was working on was being aware of body processes. World War II was really something that sparked a discussion and a set of thinking within Gestalt, and also kind of the rebellion and existential philosophy. So existential philosophy, without going too deeply into it, is a kind of counter-culture. It was at the time a counter idea of human existence from that was traditional, which was of course the church or people's temples, whatever faith position, there was a god at the end of it, whereas existentialism sees us between two voids, interestingly enough. And it's the integration, so it's about how people feel and about the encounter with people. So when we talk of the encounter, Gestalt psychotherapies tend to be quite challenging. And I had a piece of Gestalt therapy with my good friend Karen Burke. It was a demonstration at a training course. And what was really interesting is that, unlike a person-centered therapist who goes for the emotion, Karen was really interested about my physical reaction to things I was talking about in my life. So she'd say, I see you gulping, I see you patting your hand. And that's where Gestalt psychotherapy kind of moves past person-centered therapy. They both share the same root, phenomenology, the idea that we are people who live and form ourselves by experience. Where Gestalt changes is Gestalt moves past just working with the feelings and actually into the encounter, observation and challenge of someone's bodily reactions to an event or something they're talking about. So, Karen was quite, I won't say forceful, but very direct in saying, I noticed that you move your hand, I noticed you do this, I noticed you do that. And it was about trying to connect me to my body processes. There's a lot of connection between Gestalt and a few other therapies. Self-actualization is a component of it. And also our experiences can activate our own self-actualization. Self-regulation is quite big in Gestalt, and they talk about equilibriums, disturbing equilibriums, sensation or desire, taking actions and return to equilibrium. So I'll explain what an equilibrium is. If you think of a pendant clock moving, the pendant will move from side to side. An equilibrium really is when it comes to rest. In other words, it's not going left, it's not going right. It's about in a fixed state. An equilibrium is where something's completed, left and right and stop. So I'll give you an example of that, and the best way I can describe it is an equal state of equilibrium is you don't feel thirsty. Okay? So think about your day-to-day kind of life. You don't feel thirsty. Then all of a sudden, you think, I could just do with a drink of water. So this is a Gestalt forming. It's a pattern that needs a completion. So the first part is, I'm not really thirsty. Then maybe half an hour later, I really feel thirsty. I'll go and get a glass of water. So we're moving through into an action stage. I'll do something about it. I take the action, I drink the water, and then I go back to a state of equilibrium where I feel that I don't need a drink. So that cycle of not wanting a drink, needing a drink, having a drink, finding a drink and drinking a drink is a Gestalt. It's a completion. It's sometimes referred to scientifically as homeostasis, which just means a completion of things. The goal of therapy is to become aware of the entire self. So this is quite interesting. Unlike person-centered therapy, which works on the edge of awareness, becoming aware of our emotions, introjected values and conditions of worth, Gestalt psychotherapy is interested in our whole body process. So it's being aware of how we react to certain situations, how we feel in certain situations. And a Gestaltist, I guess, and there isn't one here to ask, but I guess would tell us that brings us awareness and it enhances it. So if I'm talking about something and I notice that I feel my throat's drying, what's that about? Is that about some kind of fear? And And sometimes we talk about swallowing our emotions. It's very well known in the world of eating disorders that bulimia is about swallowing your emotions. You're literally swallowing them and then throwing them up again. And that is very much a Gestalt idea. And actually, in my experience, quite true. The therapist's role is to help clients become aware of their needs, sensations and desires. And what I would say is this is done by direct confronting. And, what I would say is anybody who's watched the Fritz Perls video, I think a lot of modern Gestalt psychotherapists, and certainly Karen Burke said that actually they don't work as, quite frankly, as brutally as Perls. They do it in a more kind of considered way. But nevertheless, they confront and say, well, hang on, this is this behaviour. One of the things, and maybe we'll put a video up of me and Karen talking about Gestalt psychotherapy from our YouTube channel, but she stops people who say but. So if someone says, I'd love to go on holiday, but Gestaltists would say the first part of that discussion before the word but's actually not worth anything, because it's just a kind of preamble that has no awareness to it. The but is the full stop. It's everything after that really is the stuff to work with. What else to talk about Gestalt psychotherapy? Well, it is about wholes. It's based, not holes in the ground, about being whole, a whole person, understanding your entire process. And it's also based very strongly on phenomenology. And phenomenology is the direct experience, how we experience the world. I think Edmund Husserl summed it up very eloquently with back to the things themselves. In other words, it's not analysing, it's really about this is what it is and this is how I feel and this is how I respond to it. Yeah, phenomenology is your direct experience of the world. And there's like loads of different ideas in Gestalt. One of the key things is a co-created relationship, and I'm going to finish on that. Co-creation is about I and thou, and it's an idea that is generated from this position of seeing someone as a real person in the world, a real authentic connection. And it's about defining the client's process, being really in their frame of reference, and also making sure the client's taking ownership of the therapy. There's an emphasis on clients really taking control of their lives as opposed to a therapist leading them there, if you like. Well, I hope you've enjoyed that little podcast or little discussion on psychotherapy. I'll finish off and I'll put this in to as a handout. Some of the key terms that we find in psychotherapy, in Gestalt psychotherapy: introjection, which is introjected values, introjection, and that's basically a belief in other people's standards and beliefs. We've been here before, haven't we? Introjected values and conditions of worth, injunctions and drivers, about other people's views of you, taking them on. Projection, a client projecting their emotions or traits onto others, seeing in others really what they are themselves. Retroflexion, that's the interesting one, isn't it? Retroflexion is when someone kind of dismisses you or discounts you. And finally, deflection and confluence. Deflection is used to distract or avoid, and it can be using humour excessively. So you've all met people who say, how are you doing? Oh, I'm not very well at the moment. We mustn't grumble. That's the type of humour, excessive humour, self-deprecation. It's called deflection. And when people deflect, you can bet your bottom dollar that actually there's something behind that. And confluence, and that's a wonderful word. It's one that I've only just been recently introduced to. Confluence. Now, confluence is a merging of boundaries. Now, perhaps the best way of describing confluence is by the example of the water. One drinks the water and it's inseparable. At the time it's drunk and it's ingested, it's virtually inseparable from yourself. So therapists would work on these ideas, and certainly with confluence, it's about boundaries. If someone's too confluent, I guess, with someone else, it means they don't know where they stop and the other person begins. And that could be useful in some areas of your life, but in others it could be a complete disaster, because if you haven't got any boundaries, then who knows where that'll lead. So I hope you've enjoyed this little presentation on Gestalt psychotherapy. And just remember, next time someone says, I'm eating humble pie, or I've swallowed my pride, almost certainly they're leading you into the world of Gestalt psychotherapy.
Well, there you have it. And I recall, Rory, that I contacted you to speak about one of the upcoming podcasts, and you answered the Skype call, and in the background was playing that very same Kate Bush song. And I remember you saying, hold on, I'll turn it off. And I thought, wow, that's an interesting music to listen to while you're working. But it all makes sense now. You were doing your research for that fantastic section of theory. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks, Ken. Yeah, and it's an interesting part of history. Very few people connect the two. And if you're really into that and looking at the history, there's a great book called The Book of Dreams by Peter Reich, who, of course, was Wilhelm Reich's son. So Google that. I think it's not been published for a few years, but they've just republished it, called The Book of Dreams. Really interesting, and it's a small world, isn't it? World of music, world of psychotherapy.
So that moves us right on to skills with Ken. And today I'm going to be looking at honing of skills. So we've covered skills, various skills in previous podcasts. And of course, I invite you to go back and listen to those. They're all clearly labeled up. And you'll find that I've kind of maybe taken one aspect of skills in each one of those. But there comes a time where we bring those skills together, and that's in that therapy room. And how can we improve or hone or better our skills? What are the techniques that we can use? And hopefully you'll get something out of this week's session.
Counselling Skills with Ken Kelly.
So as we come to the end of Season 1 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast, I come to the end of Season 1 of skills and linking skills to practice. And today I just wanted to cover how we bring it all together. And I don't mean what order the skills should be in, because they're going to be in the order that is required by the client who is there present in front of you at the time. What I'm talking about here is, how can you hone your skills? How can you sharpen your skills? How can you practice your skills? How can you get a better understanding of how your skills work within your counseling relationship? And how can you understand what difference that makes in the journey of the client? And I'm going to be sharing that with you today. So if we go right back, session 1 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast, and you can go back and listen to these, I covered the skill of silence. In session 2, we looked at the process of reflection as a skill. Session 3 was paraphrasing. 4 was how to open a session respectfully. In week 5, it was idiosyncratic empathy. Episode 6 was looking at focusing. Episode 7 was looking at the skill of using appropriate open questions. In episode 8, we looked at the more advanced skill of immediacy. In episode 9, the skill of challenge. Episode 10 was looking at appropriate endings in counselling. And in week 11, we looked at how the 7 stages of process can actually be seen and be present within the counselling relationship, and how they link to the skills that we're using. Week 13 was metaphor and simile. And in week 14, we looked at the importance of rapport building and how we can use that as an advanced skill. In the last episode, episode 15, we had a look at making appropriate referrals. You're there, you're with the client, you're practicing your skills, and you recognize the need to make that appropriate referral. And today, again, it's about putting it all together, sharpening it, and making it the best it can be. Now, Carl Rogers said that the greatest learning that you can get from skills is from listening back to them. And he speaks about how he and his students would gather around the recording equipment and listen back to the skills, the recorded sessions, and look for the moments where either something didn't work and talk about why didn't that work, or for moments when something really magical happened, where there was that moment of movement where that client self-actualized and they'd look and they think, what is the magic ingredients? What is actually happening here? And he recognized that as the richest form of learning. And the same is said for today. And with the technology that is available, it is so easy to record your sessions. Simply go on eBay or an auction site and buy a second-hand recorder, pop it down while you're learning, while you're studying, while you're at college, while you're doing your simulated skill sessions, and record your sessions. Because what you can get from listening back to those recordings is the deepest of learning. The first benefit you're going to get is instantaneous, and it is that you can actually listen to your skills. So you may be doing, in your learning institution, you may be doing weekly skills sessions where you will do a simulated skills session with one of your peers. Record it every single week, and listen back and get to know yourself. Because here's the thing, your skills are only heard by your clients. You don't get to hear them yourself. And it's a sad day when the only time that you do actually get to hear your skills for the very first time is when those skills are being assessed. It doesn't give you an opportunity, a chance to have a think about your skills, have a think about what you might do better, see what's working and what is not working. The next benefit is you can ask your peers to listen to your skills. If you're working with somebody in a pair or in a triad, afterwards listen back to the skills. Talk about it. Get into a discussion, debate, ask them their views on it. And if you can get yourself a little group together at your college, at your university where you're studying counselling, if you can get a little group of peers together that do the same, you can learn from one another. And of course, always remember, even in a simulated skill session, just to contract with that client beforehand. But it is great learning that you will get from listening to your skills, your own skills, and from listening to your peers' skills. You'll pick up things that you might want to use and take into your own practice. But the big question here is, what is it that you listen to when you listen back to your skills? Well, I can tell you what you don't listen to. What is not important is what the client is bringing, so the material that the client is bringing. Of course it's important. It's important within the counselling relationship, but it's not that important when you're listening back, because that material has already been brought. What you're listening for is, how did you respond to that material? So you're listening less to what the client is bringing and more to how you are responding to that material. Now, this is important specifically if you find yourself working with peers and listening to one another's skills recordings. It's very easy to fall into the trap of starting to analyze and talk about the client and the material that they are bringing. Try as best you can to steer far away, because there's no learning in skills right there. That's analysis, and it has no place in your skills. Steer away from that and just look at how you responded to that client. You're looking to see if you can name the skills. So when you hear yourself speaking or responding to a client, what skill are you using there? Name it, write it down, and then have a look. What did that do? The skill you used, what effect did it have within that client-counselor relationship? Did it work? Did it not work? Did it lead the client to go deeper into the material? Was there a mismatch? Was it a good fit? Have a listen and see what that effect is. And that's going to be really, really important when we come to how we write the assignment, because that's one of the criteria that the awarding body are looking for. And then finally ask yourself, what could I have done differently in this situation? So if a skill was used and you feel that it didn't maybe hit the mark, what could you have done differently that would have maybe deepened the empathy? If you find something that worked really, really well, why did it work so well? What was the magic ingredient in that moment that made that work? The next step is define your skills. So the first part of defining your skills is to know what the skills are. And I guess listening to this, you know what the skills are already, but make life easier for yourself. Create a skills master definition list. This is going to be yours. It's going to be yours to keep for the rest of your studies. Make this list up once. You can come back to it. You can add things in. You can cross things out that you feel maybe shouldn't have been there. You can ask your peers their idea on it. But what you're trying to do is take all of your skills, silence, reflection, paraphrasing, use of open questions. You know what your skills are, and you want to write up a master skill definition list. And that's going to be structured as follows. You're going to start off with a definition. So I've taken an example here of reflection. So the definition of reflection, and this would be taught at level 2. So this is really basic stuff, and that's okay. You don't need to get too complicated on your master definition list here. Just keep it nice and simple. So reflection, the definition, is saying the client's exact words back to them without any distortion. That you know. So it's almost like holding up a mirror to the client, repeating exactly what they have said. And effective reflection is reflecting back the emotion part of the material as well. So I guess an example of that to throw in is if a client was sat with you and they were really devastated over something and they maybe said, "I'm so devastated." It wouldn't be reflecting back the emotion if you reflected that back and said, "I'm so devastated." You would want to be matching their voice pattern, maybe even matching their body language as you're reflecting that back, because you're reflecting the whole of them back. So there's your definition. Now, what does the skill do? This is the next part. So you're going to do this for each one of your skills. Definition, and then what does it do? So what does reflection do? Well, it shows the client that you've heard them. It doesn't just show that you've heard them, it shows that you're connected with the emotion as well, with the way that you reflect that back. They feel heard. They go, yeah, this person gets me. It shows the client that they have your full attention. You know, that can't be underestimated. The client feeling heard, that full attention, a reflection shows, I'm right with you, I'm right there, I'm hearing you. Is this what you're saying? And you're just reflecting back their own words. And it can give the client an invite to focus down on a specific emotion within their material. So, of course, a reflection, you're not just going to reflect random words back that the client is saying. You're going to be listening for the music behind the words, as Carl Rogers would say. You're going to be listening for the emotions, and that's what you're going to be reflecting back. So it can invite the client, if they bring a lot of material, throw in a quick emotion, and then a lot of material. If you reflect back that emotion, it can focus them down. It can really bring them into that emotion and be almost like an invite for them to go and explore that. So what does the skill do? So you've defined it, you've looked at what it does, and here's the important part. What effect does this have on the client? So with the reflection, what does a reflection do within the counselling relationship? And here, when a client hears their material back, they feel that they've been heard. And this helps, here's the important bit, this helps deepen the empathic bond between the counsellor and the client. I've been heard, so now there's a deeper level of empathy. And of course, empathy being that not only do you empathise and you're fully with them, but they perceive that. So this is them perceiving that. So how does this affect the client? Client hears the material back, that's more definition, that kind of stuff. They feel that they've been heard, that's what it does. What does it do? It helps deepen the empathic bond. So really, really important to have some time thinking about that when you create your master definition list. And then the client may spot incongruence in self. Clients may correct their own words. When it's reflected back to them, they may actually hear it as if for the first time and go, oh, actually, you know what? No, it's not really like that. It's like that. They're meeting their own incongruence. So that's something else. And of course, it can bring emotion into awareness that they may not even have considered themselves. So there you go. I've got a little bit carried away on this and I do apologize. You can tell the passion of the skills is seeping through. But there it is. There's reflection for you. Just use an example. So you want definition. What does it do? And how does this affect the client or the counselling relationship? And here's the thing, if you just take the time to do those simple things, record your sessions, listen back to your sessions, listen back with peers and discuss the skill sessions with one another, make that skills definition list, taking all your basic skills, and go back and listen to the episodes I mentioned at the beginning. And you can take the information from there and just build up a skills definition list for yourself. And map that skills definition list to what you're hearing when you listen back to your recordings. What difference is it making? This is going to take your skills to the next level. So often when we're out there and we're practicing these skills, it's the client that hears them, not us. If we take the time to reflect back on our skills, to be mindful, to be respectful that these are the tools, for lack of a better word. They're not really tools, although they're skills, but this is what we use to interact with our clients. Then it's our duty to be as good as we can be, to spend the time on it. And this is a great, great way just to take your skills to that next level. I hope that this has been useful, and I so look forward to what we might be covering in the second season of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
Well, Ken, just such a useful overview of skills. It's amazing. Kind of what struck me, Ken, listening to you delivering the skills over the season that we've just done was interesting enough, but to actually hear you talk about and hear you overview how we put them all together and how we get such great feedback from people like peers, maybe tutors, how clients react to our use of skills, just so important. It's a really good kind of wind up to that whole season that you've done on skills. Really great.
Oh, thank you. And I'm glad that you got something out of that, Rory. And I certainly do hope that you listening to this got something out of that. And again, and I asked this as we came into Theory with Rory, just to put your comments on the Facebook group. We want to hear from you as we come to the end of this season 1 and we're planning for season 2. We'd like to do more of that you find interesting. The only way we're going to know is if you tell us. So please make those comments on the Facebook page. So we're moving on, and we're moving on to a really interesting section, which is Ask Ken and Rory, and it's something that we pulled out of the Facebook feed, which is really interesting, and I guess sometimes quite shocking for learners when they enter into training to become a counsellor. And it comes from Louise Prue, and I'm just going to précis what she wrote. She basically speaks about how we change and grow as individuals during our counselling training, and how that change can sometimes have quite dramatic impacts on our lives and on our relationships with the people around us. And I know, Rory, when I sat down for that very first lecture, you said something about a health warning. Tell us more.
Yes, at the beginning of the diploma, I always say to people, that the course should come with a health warning, because part of counselling, I think, and certainly person-centred counselling training, is about what Husserl would have called the assign, the being of self, and Rogers called it the organismic self. And as people go through counselling training, they start to remove their own introjected values and conditions of worth and start trusting in their own experience. And this can be renegotiating relationships. So where a relationship isn't meeting a learner's needs, or it can be an ending of a relationship. And when I went to my diploma training, I think there's 17 of us, I seem to remember all those years ago, and I think that over half the people there left their partners because they were no longer wanting to work from an external locus of evaluation and conditions of worth. They were trusting more in their own experience, and they couldn't renegotiate that. So, yeah, it does happen. And I read that Facebook post, it just reminded me of all learners who say to me regularly in class as they come through into the second year, I can't see this friend anymore. We just don't have the same values. Part of it is becoming more educated, because obviously, you do a diploma, it is an entry-level degree, first year of a degree. But also I think it's about people really trusting their experience and saying, whoa, hang on a second. This is my view of the world, and this is how I am. And actually, you're telling me that I'm someone different, and that isn't true. And that is why it's so important to have process groups. So important, so that someone has something to check out within the process group. And how often do I hear people say in the process group, is this right? And they will talk about an event that's happened in their life and say, is this right that this is happening? Is this right? This person's saying it to me, and eventually the feedback might be, "Ooh, well, actually, no, it's not." So I would say to that person, "It's Louise. Congratulations, you're trusting in your own experience, and heck, there's nothing better in that. Yes, it needs to be checked in new and primary ways. Yes, we need to get a view sometimes, but if it's not right, if it's toxic, and that's such a powerful word." Then we don't want anything toxic in our lives. But yeah, I made some changes in my life, and I lost a lot of friends along the way. And I still see a few people, but we can no longer have the same friendship. Their values are different to mine, and that's fine,
Oh, so true, and just reflected right back at you, Rory, by my experience. And here's the thing, it can be painful, because growth is painful. And there can be some decisions that we make as we grow and we learn to trust who we are as individuals, as it can take courage. And we're called upon as counsellors, as psychotherapists, to exercise that courage to make those changes when we see them. Because here's the thing, this is what we expect of our clients. We expect our clients to grow and to see. And when you've been in counselling long enough, you come to kind of see that there's a pattern, that the growth doesn't come without the pain. It's never easy. It's not like a client goes along and they go, "Oh, right, aha, now it all makes sense," and go away with a big smile on their face. It usually gets to the point where they go, "Oh, I need to change this then." And there's a courage in standing up to make that change. So when we see that, we're called upon to make that change. And for me, it was in my marriage. I basically needed to recontract within my own marriage and reset the boundaries. I'm so glad it did, because today it is rich and fulfilling for both of us. But it needed to be, because I was changing as a person. But also, it was in my job. I was in a job where I realized I couldn't do it anymore. And there was a day, and you may recall it, Rory, because I remember bringing it in. There was a day I walked in and I just said, "You know what? I cannot do this anymore." I didn't know what I was going to do. Looking back on it now, it doesn't seem like the most logical and planned thing to do, but I just knew I could play that part no longer. It was a part of great incongruence. And I was learning that wasn't working within my life. And it took immense courage. Wow.
I do remember that, Ken, and I say at the time, and I'll say again, I do salute your courage. It was very courageous, and in fact, it's when we do those things we really find out what life's about. And you have a great saying, Ken, that the more that we head towards what we really want to do, the bigger the resistance is. And sometimes we've just got to push through it. We've got to suck it up, to use an army term. And if you really want the good life that Roger's talked about, then it's something that sometimes you've just got to work towards, and take the good and the bad times with it. But personally, like you, Ken, I renegotiated 2 relationships. I renegotiated the relationship with my wife, and also with our daughter, who'd been off to university, and she came back a different person, as university does. She'd been away for 3 years, and we're all jolly happy. And if we're not, then someone will know about it, and that's the greatest way to run a relationship, I think. This isn't right. What can we do about it?
And it can be it can sometimes be difficult where you have lifetime friendships that you all of a sudden think, I'm not that kind of person anymore. And specifically around, I know for myself, there were certain friends who had certain views on the world which didn't meet, I guess, where I was growing and being more accepting of people. They seemed very judgmental of certain races or religions or whatever that may be, and I felt that I couldn't be quiet about it anymore. I had to be vocal and say no. And that's difficult, because in me saying no, they maybe didn't want to be around me anymore, and I guess that was their choice. And I still am grateful that I made those choices, because the people that surround me now are the people that I choose to spend my time with. But it's tough. It can be tough. And I guess the other side of this coin is also to be mindful that as we grow and as we get all this information, we're on a journey. Maybe our friends and our family members are not on the same journey. And I guess there's an element of patience and unconditional positive regard that they are not experiencing this growth, and to be mindful of that as well.
Absolutely. I think that it's something I always say to all my learners when we come away from residential experiences or at the end of the course. I say, look, you've had a unique experience, and counselling training is absolutely one of the most unique experiences I think a human can go through. To review self in a safe, hopefully a safe place. It might not feel safe, but the overall idea that there's safety there, and when you come out of that, I always say that it's a crucible. Counsellors aren't taught; they're forged, and the fiery furnace of that forging is in personal development. And that, how am I going to change, and where am I going to find, as you say, Ken, that great courage to say, actually, those are no longer my views. And sometimes we just have to be thoughtful that not everybody's been through that fire.
100%. So there you have it. That's a great topic to debate, to take into your personal development groups. Take your own growth pains, I guess, take your own struggles into PD. It's a great place to take it. It's a supportive, responsive group where your fellow peers, fellow learners are experiencing similar, I guess, different roads, but similar. There you have it. And it kind of brings us to the end of this episode and this season. Yeah, and I'd just like to say thank you for watching. We're very, and I know I spoke about Ken about this, we're very touched about the amount of people who've really taken what we do to their heart and the counselling tutor idea in general. But yeah, so thank you. As I always say in my YouTubes, thank you for listening, and we'll look forward to serving you again when we come back in the next academic year with some new ideas. But in the meantime, tell us what you want, because we're here to serve you. Definitely. And we still value your feedback, your opinions, your ratings on iTunes. So keep those coming in, because they really encourage us. And I echo that thanks. You guys have been awesome. Your support has been absolutely awesome. And I just want to say a thank you to you, Rory, because you've been here week after week. And you know what? I've grown, I've enjoyed, and I've learnt from this experience. And this is not me doing it. It's not you doing it. It's us doing it. And there's a relationship and there's a bond. And I'm grateful for that. Thank you, Rory. Yeah, and yes, and you too, Ken. We've I'll say that we've become quite a lot closer over the last few months doing the podcast. We've spoken a lot more, and it's quite, anybody just podcasted as we do, it's quite an intimate thing. It really is. It really is a really experiential thing, because I can see Cad can see me, and we're working to each other's cues as we make this. So it does form a connection which is unique. So I thank you for that. Have you noticed, Ken, though? You've noticed my top, how nice and bright it is? Oh, yes. You know what that is? No. Because I've got to be holidays. Going on holidays. As we come to the end of this episode, thank you, everybody. We want your feedback. We want your comments. Tell us on the Facebook group what you want more of in season 2. And we're looking forward to bringing that to you after the summer. From me, Ken Kelly, take care. Yeah, and get yourself a cup of tea in a tea room. Stay grounded and stay safe.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.